How can I avoid looking racially insensitive if I'm just ignorant? Speaking Asian isn't quite right. Speaking an Asian language would be better. Kudos to you for trying to be aware. Slightly smiling face. The simple act of knowing that you could have been offensive and trying to avoid that in the future is a pretty good sign. All you would have had to change is say, they were speaking an Asian language that I didn't know, and you would have been fine. You can't be expected to know every language out there. Nah, that was fine I think. Speaking an Asian language sounds more natural and correct than speaking Asian, but it's a tiny thing. Easy enough to change if it comes up in the future. Don't worry about it. It's done, and it was probably clear you weren't trying to offend anyone. If you think you really did, you can approach them privately and explain what you explained here. For the future, I would try to avoid stories like these. You could also pause at that point in the story and say, I don't know if they were speaking Chinese or Korean, but it was a foreign language. And for this particular example, if you're trying to refer to a language that you don't know the name of, maybe just say their language, a different language. IDK, it's pretty clear that you have no malice in the way you said it. So you're probably good. You're worrying too much. It's less about the proper adjective and more about the intent behind it. Prepared for downvotes, but really I'm trying to better myself. If I'm ignorant about a subject, I listen. I become a sponge by hearing others' experiences and POVs. The only thing that comes out of my mouth are questions. The last thing I want to do is say something that comes off as insensitive because I didn't know. As an Asian person, I can understand that it may not be the easiest for foreigners to learn and distinguish between our various different cultures. Referring to us broadly as Asian, if you're uncertain, is perfectly fine. And then you can ask politely, may I ask what your ethnicity is? Is what I prefer hearing over, where are you from? That's better than assuming our race. Try watching some YouTube channels that focus on travel, culture, and food. There's tons of casual channels that are fun to watch. My personal favorites being Korean Englishman, Strictly Dumplings, and Asian Boss. Asian Boss makes incredible short documentaries packed full of unbiased information about cultures from all over Asia. The more you hear the different Asian languages, the more familiar it sounds, and you can begin to differentiate. I live in a huge Chinese majority city, yet I still have trouble distinguishing between spoken Mandarin and Cantonese, which leads to some embarrassing situations. I am glad that you're actively trying your best, despite the environment you grew up in. You could have easily stayed ignorant and uninformed, but you're taking it upon yourself to learn. Very proud of you. You listen freely, learn from what people tell you, and be willing to apologize. Wouldn't it have been better to have said, they were speaking an Asian language? Just the words you use make a difference. Just say, foreign language, next time. You weren't racist. You just said it in a weird, funny way that showed you don't know much about that part of the world. But as long as it's not malicious, it's not racism. To answer the question in your title, just avoid assuming X. Assuming every Asian is Chinese or Japanese. Or assuming every person from X country does Y, stereotypical thing. Ask questions in a respectful way if you're curious about something. Don't judge cultural differences. Don't stare at people from other cultures like they're animals at the zoo and treat everyone equally. Also, don't speak loudly and slowly to a foreigner. Lol. You could say speaking an Asian language rather than speaking Asian. I try and think about what place in a sentence the term is supposed to be. Asian is an adjective, so it shouldn't be the noun in a sentence. Chinese, for example, is an adjective, not a noun. My uncle tries to say things like, he was a Chinese They're people. They're more than a nationality. So I just try to speak in a way that doesn't minimize a person to just one identity. People can get offended when you invent things or say things incorrectly due to your ignorance. To fight against this, learn some basics and then mitigate backlash using those. In your example, the issue isn't that you didn't know which language they were speaking, but rather that you said they were speaking Asian. Asian isn't a language or even a type of language. You could have said they were speaking an Asian language, but unfortunately I couldn't tell you which. Same thing can happen with geography. If you don't know where someone is from but you are pretty sure of the region, just make sure you are clear about that in how you speak. If someone asks you what country an African person is from, don't just say Africa, but instead say, I'm not certain but I know it is an African country. This might be difficult at first as you don't know what you don't know. But when you notice you may have made a mistake, try to keep in mind what you said and then research that. It will quickly allow you to fill in some gaps and make you better at communicating. They were speaking an Asian language, I'm not sure which. One of the most interesting pieces of advice I heard recently in regards to misgendering people is, don't apologize, since that puts the onus on them to comfort you. Rather, say something like, thank you for correcting me. I'll try to not make that mistake again. I think this can be applied to many social faux pas situations. You're going to make mistakes. All you can do is to strive and do better. Hey up, brown person here with a lot of really wonderful and well-meaning in-laws who also grew up and stayed in a very white, rural, conservative part of the country. They're about the only progressive folks in their town, but they also have been exposed to nothing but their town for most of their lives. We've had a lot of conversations about exactly what you describe. They are very upfront about the fact that they're really worried about saying something offensive, but also want to be more engaged. I try my best to help them with that. We've had convos about why I don't particularly like it when they tell me, as a compliment, that I look exotic, or what their misgivings about my raising my kid bilingual had racist undercurrents to it, about BLM, about model minority stereotypes, etc. This has been over the course of now 7+ years. I try my best to come at it from a place of understanding and good faith. I try my best to do this with anyone, strangers and acquaintances IRL and on the internet, who I think would be willing to listen. If you have anyone in your friend circle who you can have open conversations with and ask them, can you help me figure out if there's anything you've heard me say that I shouldn't have? I'd really like to learn. And buy them a few beers while you talk. Then do it. And while you're at it, if they're comfortable sharing, get a sense of the things that have been said to them that made them uncomfortable so you can re-evaluate other things that might be in your vocabulary, speech you may not have realized were problematic. But also please remember that when you're hanging with your non-white friends and you say something that you didn't realize was problematic, chances are they've heard exactly that thing a zillion times and are kind of tired of it. I hope you don't take it personally that not everyone will have the energy, desire, emotional bandwidth to be super polite about it, or school you on language stereotypes that are racist, even if you aren't racist, which I don't think you are. Sometimes a quick apology, I'm sorry I said something rude, I'll be sure not to say it again and I'm working on it, and moving on is just fine. Good luck. You sound like a good friend. This post gives me so much hope. The fact that you're trying to better yourself and learn is so important. It isn't your fault that you were raised around little to no diversity. It's so lovely that you're learning and unlearning things you once thought were okay. I'm not the authority on anything, but my DMs are always open if you ever have any questions that you feel too embarrassed to ask people that you know hard. You could just think a little more before speaking when referring to anyone that isn't white. I don't know what language they were speaking would be better than they were speaking Asian. You wouldn't say they were speaking white if some white people were speaking English, would you? It'll take some time, but you can do it. We are products of our environment, and just showing up on here to ask for advice shows you want to do better. So kudos. Well, instead of saying they were speaking Asian, you could try saying they were speaking an Asian language. I'm not sure which one. Your word choices can have a large impact.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epic Aircast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.